Jason McManus has been working in the industry for over 14 years, beginning his career in concept design at Walt Disney Imagineering, and later as a creative director within the industry. He's been fortunate to lead and collaborate on creative design efforts for theme parks, dark rides, cruise ships, hotels, and interactive projects around the world. He is now creative art director at Thinkwell Group and a self-proclaimed record holder for most consecutive rides on the Mexico Pavilion boat ride at Epcot. Right. Oh, this is cool. Jason is also a CalArts alum, and he is now teaching the foundation courses in CalArts' Experience Design program. Everybody, please warm welcome for Jason.
Thank you.
Good luck. They're a tough crowd.
I think I can handle it. So a few years ago, I was working. A few years ago, I was working on a themed entertainment development project, and I was working with this developer, and we were trying to create this lifestyle theme park. It was basically kind of a combination of a theme park and a hotel, and it had kind of some RD&E stuff, but we're trying to do it in a different way that had never been done before. And so the developer, in order to shake things up, kind of brought in this superstar designer, this guy who had 40 years of creating really, really amazing projects. You'd know who he is, but I'm not going to say his name. Anyways, so this guy came in, and for a day we were having this really long brainstorming session, and it was going really, really well. We were coming up with amazing stuff. We were capturing lightning in a bottle, if you will. And it was going well until, you got it. So it was going really well until we came to the point where we were talking about who is our audience. That's where things kind of took a dive. He started right away with the first comment. He's like, you know what? Maybe we should throw in some phone thing for the millennials. And I said, okay, phone thing, that sounds like a lot of fun. Okay? But we kept moving forward, right? We kept moving forward. I just brushed it off, kept going, coming up with stuff, and then he said it again. It was about 10 minutes later, he came in and he was like, you know what? Millennials aren't going to show up anyways. They're going to be on their phones. Don't even worry about them. We're not going to plan for them. It's like, all right, I disagreed, but in order to just keep the thing moving, we just kept going. It was about 10 minutes later when he finally said the one thing that pissed me off. Came in and he said, you know what? Millennials, that thing we're developing, we're just going to scrap it. It doesn't matter. Millennials aren't part of our demographic. They aren't going to show up. They're lazy. He went on this rant for about 10 minutes long, and it took everything inside of me to hold my tongue that day. And I only held my tongue for two reasons. One, because I had no idea what the hell I was talking about. So if I opened my mouth, I would sound like an idiot. And two, he was a very scary New Yorker, and I didn't want to get shanked that day. So I went home that day, and I decided to learn everything I could about this topic. Why is there a bias? Why is there all of these weird things about millennials? I went home to learn everything I could, and that's what led me here today. So today, I'm here to talk to you about... how millennials tell stories. So when we're talking about millennials, what are we actually talking about? Who are millennials? Now, if you actually look this up, there's not really a set definition. There's a lot of different definitions of who millennials are. So I'm just going to give you my interpretation, okay? Millennials are anyone basically between the ages of 18 and 35-ish. It's basically anyone who came into their sort of early adulthood around the turn of the millennium. And the important thing to realize, the important difference with this sort of demographic, this age range, is they were people who lived their childhood through the late 80s and into the 90s. And relatively, when you look at the last 100 years, as far as pop culture is concerned, that was a fairly optimistic point in time. Now, the second group, which I'm kind of bundling into this millennials group just for the purposes of this discussion, is Gen Z, Generation Z. Gen Z, it kind of sounds like a drink you'd order in Prohibition. It's like, bartender, give me a Gen Z. So Gen Z is basically anyone 17 and under, okay? Now there's two very important differences with this generation, why they're different than every other generation before. The first difference is this is the generation who has grown up with a computer since birth. They have grown up with computers and the internet. So they are the most global generation by far. They are the most diverse generation by far. And the second difference, which is kind of a grim difference, is this is the generation who's grown up in a world after 9/11. And this is a generation who's grown up in a world where there have been televised wars their entire life where we've been fighting over ideology. And I bring up these two facts, and I bring up the second one specifically because there's a very important difference with this generation and everyone else. This is a generation who you can't sell on the idea that there is a thing out there that will change their life. They are a generation that is grounded in reality. That doesn't mean that they can't be taken into a world of immersion. No. There's actually a split. They like reality. They like being grounded in reality. But they also like extreme and full immersion. They don't really like anything between. Anything in between does not feel genuine. And we'll talk about that. So, when we're talking about millennials, there's a lot of very strong opinions of millennials out there. They're lazy, they're vain, they're self-obsessed, they're on their phones all the time, they're addicted to social media. And it's all true. No, it's not. There's a lot of very strong opinions. And why do we have those opinions? Why do people feel that way? Well, if you actually Google millennials, there's some very interesting things that come up. Very interesting search results that come up when you Google millennials. And it just points to the fact that people are confused with this generation. People are trying to understand the differences of why this generation is what it is. And what it comes to is that people just don't understand the radical way the world has changed. There's a series of social and cultural revolutions which have changed the way the world has been shaped. And us as experience designers, it requires us to dig deeper and to look further and acknowledge the shifting paradigm. The one thing that millennials have vastly changed by, the one thing that changes with millennials and kind of with the public in general, is the speed and the way we generate and consume media. We're consuming media at an enormous pace now, and it's getting faster and faster. The amount of media we consume in a single day is staggering, and we're only getting better and better at it. We are a growing sponge. The way people used to interpret that fact is that our attention spans were getting shorter. It used to be, people used to say that, I'm sure all of us have heard that. People's attention spans are getting shorter, but it's not true. But the way we reacted to this in the early 2000s is people created what was called snackable content. This is creating little bite-sized pieces of information for people that had attention spans shorter than a few minutes. But when you look at the media outlets out there, you had BuzzFeed, the king of snackable content, kings of viral media and clickbaity titles like, at age 12, she suddenly started talking like a sheep. The reason why will shock you. You see that headline online and you want to click on that. I want to click on that. I want to know why the girl talks like a sheep. But this was a novelty for a while. It worked. It was really cool. But this isn't how millennials want to consume information these days. Millennials are getting better and faster at consuming media, and so this allows us to take in longer form content and actually pay attention to and soak in that content. So BuzzFeed has actually switched to a new format where they still have the clickbaity titles, they still have the trash side of the website, but they also have long form articles, long form content. BuzzFeed has become an actual news agency. And then Netflix. Netflix is a business model that only exists for the purposes of taking an entire TV show and letting you watch it all at once. That's a huge commitment. Wouldn't be possible with a short attention span. It's actually changing the way that we consume content. It's actually changing the way in the fact that this content wasn't intended to be consumed that way. So you can binge on the entire series of Family Matters and wonder why little Rudy Winslow goes missing in season 4, and nobody explains why. And then we have documentaries. Documentaries are becoming huge again. There's a little way they're changing, but outlets like Vox and Vice and another outlet that should start with V are creating content that speaks to the generation. But the difference between the documentaries of old and the documentaries of now is the hosts are people who look like millennials, who sound like millennials, speak like millennials, and break the fourth wall to talk about the thing that's actually happening in the middle. It's a different format, but there still is a 2-hour commitment. There's entire channels on TV devoted to playing these documentaries. PBS and Ken Burns just released the Vietnam War. If you haven't seen it, it's brilliant. You should watch it. It's basically a 12-hour, when you put it all together, docuseries about the Vietnam War. The core audience of this, surprisingly, is millennials and Gen Z. In fact, the #1 complaint they had about the Vietnam War was that they released it in chapters and they couldn't watch it all at once. One 12-hour commitment. So there's a lot of really interesting things happening. And it's kind of a scary fact when you think about how fast things are going and everything. But to refresh you, there's one fact about humans that exists and always will. And that is our human ability to tell stories. Humans are natural storytellers. It's something built inside of us. It's actually an evolutionary quality. We are built from evolution to tell and understand stories. When we were back in the age of the cavemen, prehistoric times, stories were the only way that we can communicate things like dangers and perils, how to hunt and gather for food, how to get cures, successes. Stories were the way we passed vital information from generation to generation. There's actually scientific evidence that proves the existence of this evolutionary fact. And it comes down to three hormones which exist inside the body, which interact with the brain, and that's dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins. And they all work in very interesting ways in a combination, and I'll explain a little bit of how each one does. Dopamine is a hormone. It's a neurotransmitter. These are all neurotransmitters when they hit the brain. Dopamine is a neurotransmitting hormone that when it hits the brain makes us feel focused, makes us feel attentive. As you're listening to the words coming out of my mouth right now, dopamine is coursing through your body. The reason you can pay attention to me is because you have a rush of dopamine that's going through you. Dopamine is also highly addictive. It's a drug. And when you don't have dopamine anymore, you really wish you had it back. So dopamine is also the same thing that we experience when we have things like sex and drugs and... Nope, that's hearing loss. The second hormone is oxytocin. And oxytocin is a beautiful hormone because oxytocin is the hormone of relation. Oxytocin is what we feel when we feel a human-to-human connection. It's what makes us feel empathy. It's very, very beautiful. The third is endorphins. Endorphins are actually a series of 4 endorphin, which work as a combination in the body. And endorphins are kind of the thing that make you feel peppy and happy and fun. When you hear a funny joke, when you laugh, when you smile, endorphins are released in the body. The other thing endorphins are released by are when you experience things like dark rides and roller coasters. So very important to us in this industry. So there you have it, dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins. And why am I bringing this up? Why does that matter? Why do we care about this? Well, the reason we care about this is because there's something you can learn about the future by looking at the past. By understanding how humans have evolved to interpret storytelling, how humans have evolved to tell and receive stories, that helps us look at how things are changing, and by combining those two things, we can start to develop a plan of how we develop attractions for the future. So, dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins released in a very specific combination in the body when we listen to stories. Now, millennials are largely seen as vain, disconnected, and addicted to their phones. Social media is ruining the social fabric of the earth, is what we are told. But if you actually look deeper into the research, dopamine, oxytocin, endorphins, in the exact same combination, are present in the exact same way, whether people are speaking face-to-face, having the face-to-face conversation, or whether people are having an online interaction with their friends. So what we're showing now, studies are actually showing that there is no difference. There's actually the same human-to-human bond and connection between the two. And so the other fact is we've become a sharing generation. We consume media not for our own personal enjoyment anymore, but so we can go off and share that with our family and friends. We watch Game of Thrones not so we can watch Game of Thrones, but we watch Game of Thrones so we can go to work and talk about Game of Thrones. It's what we do. And the other phenomenon that's happening is you now have kids in America and kids in China playing Minecraft together. What that's doing is that's bridging social barriers, bridging cultural barriers. And it's having people making connections over something that they're both passionate about. Now I've talked about all of that. I've given you the science lesson of all this. Why does that matter? Why is that important to us in themed entertainment? Well, okay. For me, it comes down to this. From the dawn of Disneyland, we have been trying to work on the thesis that attractions need to be created to be experienced with the entire family and friends, right? This is something you do with your family and friends. However, if you shift your thinking now, if you realize that people have changed, people are different, the fact that people carry an entire social tree with them is a fact that can be used now. Instead of creating it just for that family and friends who are there, consider that people have a group of social tree where people can engage, experience, and share things together. They're all willing to do this. If you shift the thinking, you shift the way you process this, you can create levels of immersion and suspension of disbelief that tackles not only the person there, but their entire web of a social audience. You're essentially expanding your audience, and all it requires is one person to be there and one person to have one of these. So I know what you're all going to say. I know what half of you are thinking. The problem is you can't be there. The problem is they're not there, and that's a problem, right? Because we all want people to be there. Well, let me blow your mind for a second, because with the millennial generation, and especially Gen Z, the whole concept of location and being there is the same. In fact, what they're showing is with Gen Z, there's no difference in their mind with actually being in a location and experiencing that location digitally. Let that sink in for a second. That's a huge cultural shift. The whole idea of being there is different now. And I don't know why you guys even care about people being there, because you're all trying to throw VR helmets on people as an excuse as why you don't have to build shit anymore, so give the kids some slack. So another thing about millennials is they all want control. They want to control how things happen, when things happen. They want to control the story. When you give people control, when you let them control all the different aspects of this, you get what's called genuinely full immersion. The reason why is because this is a generation of makers and builders. They're makers because they want to help create the story. And they're builders because then once that story is created, they want to take it and they want to run with it themselves. When they are invested in the story making, their mind goes immediately, by default, into that suspension of disbelief that we all treat as the God that we're trying to get, right? But you're also creating a story that's genuine. And people want to see characters that look like them, characters that sound like them, in situations that are relatable. And I don't just mean relatable like I'm a suburban white kid who lives in Santa Clarita. I mean, it's relatable in the sense that these are also people who consume so much media that they can paint pictures very easily. So sending them to Pandora or sending them to some exotic environment is a lot easier for them. But the trick to creating a genuine, immersive story for them is you have to pay attention to the details. The details matter. And the amount of depth that you build into a product matters. So when we're talking about the nature of the genuine quality of this generation. We talk about things like marketing. Let's look at marketing. It used to be that things like supermodels and well thought out advertisements used to sell everything, right? The whole idea, this is a product that will make you cool, will make you pretty, or will make you happy, will change your life. That doesn't work anymore. This doesn't work with the new generation. Product unboxing videos, makeup reviews on YouTube. This is what kids are watching these days. This is what kids listen to. And this is their information. And why? Because it's somebody who looks like them, somebody who sounds like them, and knows their situation, is talking person to person. It's genuine. It's not a company selling them on an idea. It's people having a conversation, people having a bond with one another through media. So we know that guests want control, and the one asset they want to control more than anything is time. We want to know when things are going to happen. We want to know how they're going to happen. We want to control when that happens. But the other thing is the concept of time with millennials is different. They're able to drop a story at any point in time, come back to it hours later like they never left. It's a very interesting phenomenon that has happened. And inside theme parks now, as we're building these experiences, you have to plan for that. You can't just assume that because people have dropped it that they want to move on to something else mentally. So guests are interactors, essentially, is what we're saying. Guests want the ability to have all these controls. They want to take the story. They want to run with it. They want to interact with your product. And a lot of projects go wrong by assuming that they always want to be interactors. There are a million examples now in America of really bad escape rooms that are dependent on giving you all interaction and no story. And that's assuming that people just want to be interacting the entire time. With this generation, they can go from interactors to observers at any point in time, and that's a fluid concept. They can do it without warning, and they'll go back and forth from one to the other. So essentially, you have people who want to interact and people who just want to sit back and be told a good story. Now, a lot of these concepts are playing out in the idea of role-playing. Role-playing is taking over the world right now. It's in marketing, it's in theme parks, it's in museums even. It's everywhere, and it's increasing. Now, role-playing, the idea of role-playing is really abstract. There's a lot of different ways it can be done. Coca-Cola has given people a role. Coca-Cola is a company that always seems to have their finger on the pulse of generational changes. And the Share a Coke campaign is one of the most successful campaigns of all time. What Coca-Cola did is they just created a bunch of customized bottles with words, random words, and names on it. And what they did is they told people to go out and make your own stories. People took these and made beautiful things. They made videos, they made memes, they created moments for each other. And it became a powerful tool for Coke because Coke, again, is not saying, here's this product that makes you cool, or here's this product that'll change your life. Coke is saying, here's a product that becomes a tool to help you make memories. And that is the best brand recognition you can get. So role-playing also has more of a traditional role in marketing. And a good example of this is the ARG, Advanced Role-Playing Game, Lewis Hamilton's Secret Life. Came out years ago, but it's still a very relevant example today. Lewis Hamilton's Secret Life was a game that was developed by InDreams in conjunction with Reebok, and it followed the fictional second life of Formula One driver Lewis Hamilton as he went around the world solving crimes and finding stolen art. So the way the game worked is there were a lot of online puzzles. People would enroll and interact with each other. There were puzzle pieces, parts of puzzle pieces, sent to people around the world, and it required people to get online, connect, form a connection, and compare notes to build all the different clues to those puzzles. It included different cryptic media ads that were placed in TV shows. It included live events, big live events that were staged around the world. It became an international phenomenon. It actually included 750,000 players in 156 different countries. Worldwide phenomenon. And it's just one example of how role-playing has now taken over the marketing world. And then in the theme park world, we've kind of seen the scratching of the surface of role-playing. We've had a couple examples recently. There's a lot more, but just two we're pointing out today is Legends of Frontierland at Disneyland and Ghost Town Live at Knott's Berry Farm. Two role-playing adventures that happened, but the interesting thing, if you haven't seen this, which I'm sure you all have, is we are now taking characters and we're taking a play in the park, but guests are actually given a real role. Treatments for rides for forever have always said, what is the role of the guest in this experience? But it's always like, they're a camera, or they're some sort of experiential person going through this. This was an experience that actually gave someone a real name and real context in the experience. They had the ability to go through and with their decisions, change the way that the entire experience happened. There was no way to plan what it was going to look like at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. And that is giving guests real control. That's what they want. But this is really only scratching the surface. Now, the trick of all this is when you're trying to engage that audience who wants control, there's a potential of alienating the other side of the audience who doesn't want control, who just wants to sit back. The old people, sorry. So how do you engage the entire audience? How do you engage that entire spectrum of people who want to interact, people who just want to observe? Well, the frontier of experiential entertainment is one where the designer and the guest both tell the story together. Create the story with the guest. Let them take it, let them run with it, and then let them entertain the rest of the audience. It's what we call the entertainment ecosystem. You as the designer don't have to do all the work. You create part of the story. But let your baby go. Let them run with it. Let the guest create the other part of the story. When they've developed that, it becomes its own beast. It becomes something different every single day. And then that gets sent out to the rest of the audience, the observers. The observers take that information and then they become a passive character too. Once they get engaged and once they get involved, it's a cyclical system. You have the ecosystem of entertainment. The best part of this is every single day that attraction is repeatable. We have always talked about attractions being repeatable, or repeatable attractions as the holy grail in this industry. And with this sort of a system, when you give guests full and actual control of the outcomes, you inherently get that. So wrapping up a lot of the things I've said today, wrapping up a lot of these points, I'm going to give you 5 bullet points of how to create experiences for the emerging millennial audience. The first is continue to tell a good story. You're living in the age where storytellers are embraced. I mean, look at graphic novels. Look at how many people want to know the author of the story. Story is embraced. So continue to tell a good story. We are natural storytellers. It is built inside of us. The second is you will be rewarded with depth. You're living in the age of the nerd, ladies and gentlemen. This is the age of Easter eggs and hidden story points and just all sorts of different depth points. When you create a story that's compelling, you can go as far as you want with it. You can create as many avenues, and I guarantee you, if it's good, you will have guests who will find every nook and cranny and every corner of that story. Star Wars has taken this and run with it. You can follow in its footsteps. Number 3, embrace the social tree. Again, an abstract concept, but guests have a very powerful network that's with them, and because they don't have the same concept of location and space, you can engage that audience. You can immerse them just like the person who's actually going through the experience. When people are broadcasting on Facebook Live, when they're interacting on Snapchat, that audience is engaged, and if you create an experience that's designed inherently to deal with them, you have a new model of attraction that's never been done before. Number 4, give control to guests who want it. Millennials want control. They want to control time. They want to control all the aspects of it. So give it to them. Let them do it. You're creating an attraction that's inherently repeatable. And then that leads us to number 5, let your guests be the entertainers. When they take the story and when they run with it, they're creating all the entertainment points. You're not having to work as hard, and they're entertaining the entire audience. The audience is hearing a story that's built from people who look like them and who sound like them. So now that I've given you all those points, now that I've babbled on about all this, let me tell you, I don't consider myself any smarter than anyone else for having known all this crap. I'm just a dude that has Google and a Microsoft PowerPoint. But I was kind of concerned when I saw so many people writing off this generation. It was a frustrating thing to somebody. I am an optimist, and so where others see challenges, that's where I see the opportunity. So where some see a lazy, disengaged generation of people who are socially disconnected, you know what I see? I see a smart, savvy audience who cares about content. There are people who invest numerous hours of their precious time to sit back and watch a compelling story, who will then go and take that story and go share it with their family, their friends, and their coworkers. They're a generation of people who, above all material possessions, value memories and genuine experiences. They're building bridges across cultural barriers, sharing content with people, making connections with people who share the same passions as them. They're people who, when they go to interactives, want to know why one decision is better than the other. And then they want to know how those decisions affect things for them and for others down the line. They're a generation of makers, they're a generation of builders, and they're a generation of people who write stories and write fan fictions. They're a generation of abstract thinkers who the whole concept of time and space doesn't mean the same thing to them. They're opening the doors wide for all of us as experienced designers, and they're looking to reward us for going that extra step and going that extra mile to innovate new and compelling, attractive ideas that create full immersion. So, where others see a lazy generation that's disconnected, that's where I see an audience who's willing to engage, who's willing to share, who's willing to explore, but most importantly for us, is willing to experience. And that's how millennials tell stories.
Question. Hand in the air. Here we go. Let's start with you, Joe. Yes.
Hi, Jason. My name's Brian.
Hey.
A great point that you brought up about how the millennials want control and want to determine their level of involvement within some sort of interactive experience. I think back to long experiences in live role-playing games, back to ancient history time ago. I'd like to hear you talk about determining on your side as a creator how to figure out the amount of experience, the amount of interactivity that they want, so that you can balance an audience's amount, because some people want to be an observer, some people want to be, and then like you said, switch in the middle.
Right.
How as a creator do you work on that?
Yeah. Well, so the example that I gave was escape rooms, right? Escape rooms are, that is a product where people go in and for a set amount of time, but literally you can't get out until you figure it all out. And there are versions of escape rooms out there that give people opt-in points or opt-out points within the story. When they freak out and they're like, I can't do this anymore, the good escape rooms will take over with a story point and kind of help them along the way. And attractions can do the same thing. Attractions, when you're building an attraction that is designed to give people control, you have to consider that. Like, what are the points that people potentially could take the scenic route, right? And go off and just sit back and enjoy everything. So that's what it really comes down to, is you can create an experience that's like the ultimate decision-making quizzy game ride, but that's going to frustrate people because you will have people that are shifting, right? There's people that will sit through and want to interact the entire time, and so as long as you make those decision points opt in or opt out, if it's a decision they can make to keep going or take that detour, you're fine. But it really all comes down to playtesting at that point. That's how you decide what those opt in and opt out points are.
Jason, I'm Andy.
Hey.
When you give control to other people to help tell the story, the people that are running the show, people that are offering it to you, probably have some limitation of, we don't want it to get too far. We don't want them to venture too far off, so the kids are like, Daddy, what are they talking about? That's kind of adult stuff. So is there a danger that how can people that are running shows control that so that the people who want to interact, who take it too far, don't feel like, oh, you're shutting me down. You're telling me what not to do.
Yeah. Well, there's two schools of thought on that. There's a first school of thought of you as the designer, and this is the one I'm more in, is you as the designer can define how big or small of a box people can play in, right? The trick to doing that, though, is not letting people know where the boundaries of that box are. There's a bad way to do that and a good way to do that. Mission Space is an attraction that lets you assume you have control. Well, the old Mission Space. That lets you assume you have control, but in reality, it was just an illusion, right? I'm not actually piloting the ship. That's a box that is way too narrow. That's not real control. You can go too far with it and give them so much control that they can go crazy with it and totally destroy the experience. So you have to define what that box is. The other school of thought is guests in a group setting will self-regulate a lot of that. So where some guests go out of line, as long as multiple guests have control, they all act in their own group best interest, and they'll kind of bring it back to the center point. That's something that has to be tested. That's potential anarchy. So, but it's worth exploring. I hope somebody takes it and runs with it and actually tries to do that in a theme park. It's worth taking risks that could potentially lead to failure. That's how we innovate new things. Yep.
Roller coasters.
How do you define it on roller coasters?
Well, I mean, how does this apply to, essentially high volume mechanized rides that, essentially don't offer any choice at all except for to get in the front or the back?
You can offer choice. I can't say more than that without breaking an NDA. But it is possible. It is possible. And it comes down to, the only thing I could say is look at what has been done recently. There's a lot of great technical innovations which allow for that. Trackless ride systems, same methodology can be applied to track systems if you're very clever.
Let's go in the back here, right here.
During the last bit of the talk, you alluded to cosplay and fan fiction. Mm-hmm. How should older institutions, for example, the publishing industry, which has been very suspicious or very much not in love with the idea of social interactions that involve these properties, deal with things like original characters, or, for example, Disney bounding, where the park did have ask people to moderate what they wore to the parks.
Yeah, well, I think there's two issues there. Disney bounding is partially a fear of guests representing the IP in the park, and they want to be very protective of that, right? It's coming more from the fear that guests are going to dress up like Cinderella in Disneyland and then like sign autographs and stuff, which I think that would be cool, but the other part of it is that IPs are afraid of guests creating their own lateral content, right? And that going crazy. Why are you afraid of that? I mean, look at frickin' Harry Potter. I mean, guests have taken that and they've run with it and they've made it their own beast, and that has just brought more people into it, right? Like I said, this is the age of the fan fiction. People creating fan fictions, that's just a niche to get more people involved in an IP and a brand and stuff. So I think publishers, everybody, we need to embrace people becoming fans of our IP. We need to embrace people who want to wrap themselves up in our content. So, yeah, I mean, if you're concerned about security, that's one thing, but if it's about protecting your IP, you're stupid.
Hi, Jason. Kevin. So you're saying millennials have these voyeuristic tendencies that they equate watching something to experiencing something, but they also really want control. When we're trying to create these amazing experiences, what is is it the quality of the experience that then makes them say, I no longer want to be a voyeur, I want control within that world? And if it is the quality, what is that that specific thing that makes them say they want to do it?
As far as we all know right now, there's nothing that leads them to shift from one and the other. It really comes to personal preference. People have different tolerances for how much they want to interact with something. It all comes down to who we are as people. So all you can do, because you can't predict that. You can force it, I guess. You can tell people, okay, now sit back and watch this thing, but then the guests who want to remain in control feel like you just kind of you pulled the toy away from them. So there's really not a way to predict it. The only thing you can do is accommodate the people who want to be able to shift at any point in time.
With that, Jason McManus.
All right.